It drifted in silence, dead, derelict, forgotten by time. A prison forged not for reform, but for extinction. Orbiting a lifeless planet, its metallic hull bore the scarring of ancient wars, its lights dim, and systems kept barely alive by automated routines long left without oversight. No crew, no visitors, only dust and the hum of machines that never learned how to die. Deep inside, in the lowest level of this orbital crypt, was a single sealed chamber, buried beneath layers of security protocols and biolocks. Inside that chamber lay the last of a species once feared as celestial apex predators, dragon-like beings born of stellar nurseries, scaled in luminous alloys, and capable of breathing plasma hotter than suns. This one had a name, once, carved in comet trails and spoken in pulses of gravitational waves. It had long forgotten it. Strapped down by gravitic clamps, its wings withered and spine hunched, it hadn't moved freely in nearly a century. Chains embedded into its bones. A muzzle fused over its snout. Vents in the walls exhaled dry, recycled air, deliberately scrubbed of all vapor. Dehydration was not a side effect. It was the point. It didn't know what was real anymore. Memories came in flashes, of vast nebulae it once soared through, of rainstorms on crystalline worlds, of oceans that sang. But the reality was unrelenting dryness. Cracks along its lips. Flakes of once gleaming scale turning to ash. Its tongue, shriveled like parchment, lay still in its mouth. It no longer had tears to shed. The ducts had long dried. It no longer tried to roar. The last sound it made had been a croak that even the walls refused to echo. Time didn't move in this place. There was no sun to rise, no day to end. Light stayed constant, never dimmed. Every tick of passing seconds was a betrayal. It waited for death, but was denied even that. The Korhax Empire had designed the chamber meticulously. Automated nanoswarms ensured its organs never failed. Machines pumped nutrients directly into its bloodstream. The body lived. The spirit fragmented. No touch. No voice. No sky. Just the hum of the dry air filters and the quiet crunch of its own scorched breath. Once, it had been a symbol. Rebellion incarnate. A creature that stood between the Korhax and their conquest of 5 outer galaxies. It didn't surrender. It didn't retreat. When offered fealty, it set their emissary aflame and devoured his remains in the vacuum of space. For that defiance, they chose not to kill it. Death, they said, was finite. This would be forever. Forever had now stretched past 90 years. Perhaps more. It had lost count around 60, when hallucinations blurred with the walls and its own thoughts started slipping like vapor. It spoke to ghosts. It debated itself. It pleaded with no one. It tried to dream. But even dreams require a mind that believes in something more. Every once in a while, some old system would glitch, and it would hear things, echoes from long-abandoned control rooms. Automated logs. Synthetic voices calling for checks, protocol updates, repair routes. None ever came. No ship docked. No species remembered what was buried here. Its captors had moved on. Its war, lost to footnotes in imperial archives. The only company was thirst. A hunger for water, not blood, not power, not vengeance. Just a single drop to wet its tongue, to remind it was real. That the flesh clinging to its bones had purpose. The desperation had gone beyond physical. It needed water not just to live, but to feel. There were moments, rare and cruel, when its mind tricked it into tasting rain again. A cool mist brushing its face. The trickle of river water. But then the vents hissed dry again, and it returned to agony. Hope, in this place, was the final form of torture. And so it lay there. Still breathing. Still bound. Still waiting for something, though it had forgotten what. Until something strange happened. A vibration. Not from inside, but beyond the walls. It was so subtle it might have been imagined. Yet it wasn't. The dragon, without understanding why, opened one eye. Hope didn't come rushing in. It didn't believe in hope. But something different had arrived. Not a sound. Not a scent. just a change. A deviation from the eternal pattern. And for the first time in over a century, the dragon's heartbeat shifted its rhythm. It was still a prisoner. Still in torment. But now something had changed. Something was coming. Elias Brand wasn't a soldier anymore. The war ended years ago, and Earth was quiet again, left to its own debris and losses. The galaxy moved on, forgetting the humans who once stood against empires. Now he drifted between salvage fields, fixing broken things no one cared about. His ship, a rusted patchwork of Terran tech and stolen Korhax wiring, wasn't pretty, but it flew. That was enough. He didn't chase danger, only scrap. The work was lonely, silent, honest. That's how he liked it. A weak, fragmented signal pinged his console as he passed through a dead sector. The frequency was outdated, probably a forgotten satellite or derelict station. Still, it looped endlessly, encrypted but old. Elias ran a bypass through his own filters. The metadata flagged. Classified biocontainment. That caught his interest. Containment meant secure tech, and secure tech usually meant value. He adjusted course. The coordinates led to a structure orbiting a ghost planet. Scans showed minimal power, decaying orbit, no transponders, no active defense systems. It was a miracle the station was still intact. The outer hull had faded markings, Korhax military patterns, scorched and unreadable. Automated hatches responded sluggishly as Elias docked, groaning like they resented being disturbed. The station stank of stale metal and disuse. Dust floated in the artificial gravity, thick enough to taste. No sign of life. Internal systems flickered in and out. Something, somewhere, was still running, but only barely. He moved carefully, checking corners, mapping the corridors. Old pathways had sealed themselves with age. Doors resisted his overrides. Still, the deeper he went, the stranger it felt, like something watched without moving. The layout didn't match normal prison or military specs. Too much redundancy. Entire wings served no clear purpose. Then came the power readings, one reactor still drawing energy. He found conduits that had been rerouted, tangled with external processors of alien origin. His scanners showed heat signatures in the lower decks. Faint, inconsistent, but real. Elias frowned. There shouldn't have been anything alive down there. He followed the trail. The air grew heavy. Not from pressure, but presence. He passed rusted cameras, long dead. Bloodless claw marks etched into walls. Temperature shifts that didn't align with system data. The structure was reacting to him, subtly resisting his advance. Lights flickered more the deeper he moved. Still, he pressed on. Curiosity was stronger than caution. He bypassed the final bulkhead using a trick he'd learned during the war. Korhax security had a pattern, once you knew it. The door hissed open into silence and stale humidity. The room beyond was massive, carved like a temple but reinforced like a vault. And at its center was something that shouldn't have been alive. It dwarfed the space around it. Chained at multiple points, muzzled, caged by energy fields that buzzed quietly. The thing resembled dragons from old Terran myths, but sleeker, alien. Metallic scales dulled from age, limbs emaciated but intact. Tubes ran from the ceiling into wall consoles, yet none connected to the creature. It lay motionless, ribcage rising shallowly. Eyes closed. Elias didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He just stood, trying to understand what he was seeing. Not a machine. Not a synthetic. Biological. Old. Ancient. Powerful, even in decay. The heat signature made sense now. He checked the systems. Logs were half corrupted. The name listed for the subject was just a number. Entity 117, Suppression Protocol active. Notes reference rebellion, execution denied by Imperial order, continuous hydration deprivation, cellular stasis injections. It wasn't dead because they wouldn't let it die. Something twisted in Elias' stomach. Not from fear, but anger. He'd seen what the Korhax did in war. He hadn't expected their cruelty to linger after peace. He walked a slow circle around the chamber. The creature's body was covered in scarring, burns, cuts, and something deeper. At some point, it had fought hard. Now, it had nothing left. Even its breath seemed unwilling. Elias looked down at his belt. He carried a field pack, standard issue, though long outdated. Inside, tucked beside old tools and ration bars, was a single bottle of Terran water. He hadn't opened it in months. Not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of home. He looked back at the creature. Still unmoving. He didn't know what it was. Didn't know its story. But he saw what had been done. And something in him refused to leave it like this. He unscrewed the cap. Steam hissed faintly in the cold air. Then he stepped forward. The drop hit its lips and vanished instantly, drawn in like flame to oxygen. The reaction was immediate, small, but undeniable. The dragon flinched. Not in fear or aggression, but in confusion. Muscles twitched. Eyes remained shut, yet their lids fluttered. Elias stood still, bottle in hand, heart racing. He hadn't expected movement, let alone response. He leaned closer. Another drop slid from the bottle's lip, slower this time, caught the light, then disappeared onto the parched skin of the creature's tongue. This time, its throat contracted, weakly, instinctively. It tried to swallow. For a moment, the entire room felt like it held its breath. The dragon's eyes cracked open. Only a sliver. But it was enough. What Elias saw wasn't rage or madness. It was recognition. Not of him, but of something it had nearly forgotten, relief. Its gaze was dull, dimmed by years of silence and suffering, but there was something ancient behind them. Awareness. A spark struggling to survive. Elias stepped back slowly. He didn't speak. No point. Instead, he uncapped the bottle fully and held it forward. He let the water fall in tiny droplets. Each one landed with a soft tap, soaked into the cracked surface of its mouth. It kept swallowing, weak, involuntary. It didn't have strength for anything else. Minutes passed. The dragon shifted again, more deliberately. A groan echoed deep in its throat, low and broken, but unmistakably alive. It didn't roar. It didn't snarl. It simply breathed, and for the first time in a century, the breath didn't sound like death. Elias pulled out his toolkit and started examining the surrounding systems. The prison chamber was layered with moisture locks. Every molecule of humidity was filtered out. The filtration systems were still operational, designed to maintain absolute dryness. He rerouted a few lines, tapped into a secondary coolant loop buried behind sealed panels. He worked fast, fingers practiced, movements precise. He modified the intake paths, redirected the cooling gases, introduced heat into the lines to simulate atmospheric condensation. Then he fused the adjustments in place. The entire room hissed, vents fighting back against the new input. The system sputtered but didn't shut down. A minute later, the air began to shift. Mist. Thin, translucent, dancing on unseen currents. It rose from the vents, filled the space above the dragon in lazy spirals. The creature's nostrils flared. Its chest rose deeper, more fully. Eyelids lifted completely. No words. No sound. But its head turned barely. Just enough to look directly at Elias. He didn't flinch. He stepped to the side, adjusted the settings again, fine-tuned the dispersion rate. The vapor spread more evenly. The air thickened. Beads of moisture formed on the dragon's skin. It twitched, then stilled, as if unsure whether to trust it. Then the skin began absorbing the moisture directly. The reaction spread through its body. Joints cracked. Tendons flexed. Color returned in thin streaks across its scales. A flicker of inner light traced the length of its neck, faint, like a dying star struggling to burn again. Elias sat down on the floor, exhausted but satisfied. He watched as the dragon slowly moved its tongue across its mouth. A low hum, vibrating more in the walls than in the air, vibrated around him. It wasn't speech. It wasn't a growl. It was something older, a sound of deep memory, a creature remembering what it meant to live. For hours, Elias remained, monitoring the system. He manually adjusted every fluctuation. When one pipe began to overheat, he cut the flow and spliced in a cooling grid using parts from his ship's auxiliary compressor. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't even safe. But it worked. By the time he stepped back again, the room was humid. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Enough to end a century of torment. Enough to let the creature rest without pain. The dragon exhaled. Not with fire, not with fury. Just air, clean, hydrated, heavy with the scent of water. Its eyes closed again. Not from exhaustion, but something closer to peace. Elias didn't ask for thanks. He didn't expect understanding. He'd seen enough death to know when something had been saved. He turned off his flashlight, let the system's soft glow take over, and whispered one line. "You're not alone anymore." The silence between them was different now. No longer sterile, no longer cruel. It had weight, texture, a quiet shared between two beings who understood suffering in different ways. Elias stood among the drifting mist, watching the creature rest without the tension it had carried before. The metal bindings no longer seemed like chains to something dangerous, but relics trapping a survivor. He returned to the control panel, deeper into the system than before. His previous adjustments were basic. Functional. Temporary. But this place was old, and layers beneath the interface held more than just controls. They contained records. Fragmented files, damaged protocols, encrypted orders. Elias cracked through them, one by one. Logs emerged, voices long dead speaking in text and audio bursts. Cold clinical reports. They called it an extinction order. Not public. Not sanctioned openly. The Korhaks had captured the dragon during a resistance campaign after it had destroyed a fleet. Rather than risk martyrdom, they buried it. They stripped it of identity. No name. No designation beyond 117. They erased it from history, sealed in protocol. No creature, no matter how dangerous, should have lasted this long. The systems had been designed to keep it conscious while removing all stimulus. A technical torture chamber. Elias didn't understand the full scale of what he'd found. The language was foreign. The technology ancient. But he knew abuse when he saw it. A prisoner kept not because it was needed, but because someone had once feared it too much to let it die. He isolated the power feeds and traced where they branched. Multiple backups, redundancies, fail-safes. One sequence stood out. A neural disruptor, buried in the life support system. A final switch. If the creature ever began to recover, it would be triggered. Elias studied the mechanism, realized the countdown had already begun. Not immediate, but inevitable. The system had detected metabolic changes. Hydration. Cellular activity. It interpreted survival as resistance. The process had started quietly, 15 hours until full execution. Elias felt the weight of time press against his chest. He disabled the countdown interface, but it reactivated through a backup link. He tore open the wall panel, found the central processor tied to the disruptor, and disconnected it physically. The shutdown failed again. Another bypass. Someone had built this place to ensure no one could undo it. They had expected the galaxy to forget. And it had. He didn't stop. He went deeper, past every lockout, every failsafe. He began replacing code with live data from his own system, rewriting subroutines manually. It wasn't just engineering now. It was defiance. The same kind the dragon had once been punished for. Sweat gathered under his collar. He moved quickly, efficiently. No second wasted. When another kill sequence armed itself from a hidden node, he pulled power from the entire rack, rerouting oxygen control to an independent feed. The prison systems dimmed, emergency lights kicking on. Alarms flickered then died. For the first time, the failsafe stayed down. The room grew still. Elias exhaled. Behind him, the dragon stirred again. More present. Breathing deeper. Limbs flexing with tentative strength. It wasn't fully healed. But it had enough. Their eyes met again, clearer this time. There was no hostility, no wild flare of vengeance. Just mutual understanding. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything necessary had already been said without words. He approached the last piece, the gravitic bindings. He examined the anchors carefully. They were older than the rest of the tech. Not mechanical. Interlinked with the dragon's own biofield, designed to neutralize motion by absorbing kinetic impulses before they fully formed. Intricate. Advanced. But not impossible to break. He removed a chip from his satchel, a device he hadn't used in years. It contained a frequency disruptor designed to destabilize phase-bound restraints. Military gear from Earth's final conflict. Illegal in most systems. But it was all he had. He calibrated it, pressed it against the binding's core, and activated the pulse. A soft hum rippled outward. One of the locks blinked out. Then another. The final two cracked, then dissolved. Chains fell. The dragon didn't rise. Not yet. But it shifted, uncoiled slightly, as if stretching after a lifetime of stillness. Its breathing was steady now. A quiet strength had returned. Elias took a step back. He didn't issue commands. He offered no directions. What happened next wasn't his decision. He had opened a door, not chosen a path. Whatever came now belonged to the one who had survived. The chamber felt alive in a way Elias hadn't experienced since stepping aboard. Not through alarms or machines, but through presence. The dragon's breath no longer wavered. It moved with measured cadence, slow and full, like air returned to something that had long forgotten its taste. It blinked with deliberate motion, scales flexing subtly, revealing small patches of vibrant, iridescent tone that had been dulled by age and dehydration. Its body was still thin, but now every motion hinted at recovering power, no longer hollow or defeated. Elias didn't move further. His part was done, and he knew it. Interfering more would be arrogance. The creature's survival now rested on what it chose for itself. Still, he lingered, studying its behavior, trying to gauge intent. But there was no anger in its eyes, no flinch of threat. What stared back at him was older than fury, something patient, weighty with knowledge gathered through pain. That gaze held no desire for revenge, only quiet vigilance, like a being too ancient to waste itself on petty wrath. A sound, deep and unfamiliar, reverberated through the space. Not a roar. Not speech. A resonance, complex and layered. It wasn't noise so much as a wave, pulsing gently through the air. Elias felt it behind his ribs, a vibration rather than a tone. The dragon was communicating, not with words but through harmonic frequency. The station's metal seemed to respond slightly, reacting to the subtle shifts in pressure. He remained still, letting it speak in its own way. The message wasn't a command. It was acknowledgement. A statement of being. A return. A low tremor ran through the floor. Not from the creature, but from outside. Proximity alert. Elias tapped his wrist module, eyes narrowing as it pulled data from the ship's passive scans. A vessel was inbound. Unmarked. Fast. No registry ping. That alone meant trouble. Too purposeful for a wandering salvage crew. He ran a trace on the signal bleed. It was fragmented, shielded. Corhack's relay protocol. Someone had known this facility still broadcasted. Maybe the disruptor had triggered an alert, or maybe they had always monitored for anomaly. Either way, they were coming. Elias pulled back to the chamber's edge, mind calculating. Escape was possible, but not guaranteed. His ship wasn't built for fights. If they boarded, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd see a human interfering with classified systems, standing beside an unshackled asset. The consequences would be swift and absolute. But leaving now, abandoning the dragon after everything, it wasn't an option. Not morally. Not instinctively. He'd pulled it back from the edge. To walk away before its freedom solidified would render it meaningless. He scanned the station for backup systems. There were none he could rely on. The internal defense grid had long since decayed, and the outer hull was compromised. They couldn't fight. But maybe they didn't have to. He turned to the dragon, voice calm. They're coming. I don't know what they'll do. But I won't let them take you again. It stared at him, unmoving, and then, with staggering control, it rose. First with effort, then with fluidity. The limbs were long, elegant, precise. Wings unfolded, not wide, but partially, testing old structures. It stepped forward, talons tapping against the metal, the sound deliberate. No aggression, no panic. Just certainty. A being prepared to defend itself once more. The incoming ship neared the station's docking ring. Elias prepped a manual override on the corridor seals, planning to delay entry. But before he could finish, the dragon's throat illuminated faintly, pulsing with internal energy, subtle, but growing. Not fire. Not plasma. Something elemental. It inhaled slowly, and as it did, the mist thickened around it, drawn into its core. Then, without sound or struggle, the dragon vanished. Not disappeared in a blink, but phased. The light around it bent, shimmered, and collapsed inward. A ripple of displacement echoed across the chamber, followed by vacuum silence. No trace. The heat signature on Elias' scanner dropped to 0. It hadn't died. It hadn't moved, through space itself, or folded beyond local time. The tech couldn't explain it. But the sensation lingered, not death, not retreat, but escape. The Korhax vessel docked minutes later. Elias had wiped the systems clean by then. Logs erased, hardware slagged. When they boarded, they found only dust and a lone mechanic with a half-functional ship, claiming misnavigation. They searched the station, found no signs of life, no energy spikes, no breach. Whatever they suspected, they couldn't prove. They left with threats, but no charges. Alone again, Elias drifted beyond the dead zone, the stars wide open ahead. Somewhere out there, something free moved between them, no longer in chains. And he didn't need thanks to know what it meant. Because humans didn't just survive wars. They remembered who deserved to.